what deals were inked during the Africa Forward Summit. Good morning, Carole.
Good morning.
Good to have you in studio.
Thank you.
We start off usually with a quote.
Yes.
With Felaris, we'll share the quote of the day with you. You can say if you agree, disagree, if it speaks to you or not.
Well, our quote for this morning is courtesy of William Edwards Deming. He was an American systems thinker, engineer, and management consultant, and he's noted with having organized systems and matters QC, that's quality control. Now, the quote is, "Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets." Every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. How does that speak to you this morning?
It does. It's actually very, very true. Yeah, in many ways.
Yeah? Within the context of KEPSA?
Or business.
Or business, yes.
It does, because if you have, let's say, a machine to, let me use a very simple example, a machine to process macadamia, then you process macadamia. And what are you looking for? Maybe you're looking for oil, then you get oil as the product you're looking for. It's designed for that, and I think that's the thing. And I think even for us in KEPSA, we are designed to do advocacy and to create a platform for businesses, for women empowerment, for SMEs and all that. And that's what we do.
Yeah.
We'll adjust the mic to bring the mic closer to you, Carole. But as we get into this conversation, the Africa Forward Summit came to a conclusion yesterday. Monday was, the Youth Forum and the Business Forum taking place. Billionaires, millionaires from across the globe were in this country. And yesterday we had a conversation with the president of Kenya National Chamber of Commerce. He was saying, a lot of business has been made here. Now we want to hear from the Private Sector Alliance. Has business actually been made in this summit?
It has. Of course, we have the what we would call back numbers. We don't have individual numbers, but at least the numbers that we have right now, we had about 23 billion euros, 14 of that coming from the French side, and 9 of that coming from the African side.
What is that? What do you mean? For 23 billion euros did what?
Deals.
What?
Worth of deals. Worth of deals, and that includes what the governments did, the private sector did. So there's a lot around that. I know, like for government, there's about 12. That's separate, actually, 12.9 or for the Nairobi commuter rail. But then the private sector side, we had from energy side, manufacturing side, agribusiness, innovation. So there's a lot. I think now we'll just be tracking the individuals per sector, but in terms of the sectors that were covered around those sectors.
Okay, hold on. We'll go into those ones. I'm just wondering, this 23 billion euro worth of deals transacted, was it conclusion of deals? Was it opening of talks? Or was it talks that had started long, but they're still ongoing?
There are mix.
Okay.
Yeah. So some were concluding. Some are things that are going on. Co-investments that are already going on. Others were intentions. We're starting this conversation, and this is the amount we're talking about of this kind of a project or this kind of investment will cost. So there were a mix of them. Because some people had started conversations, but then now they were inking the deals. Others were saying, now let's roll out. So there was a lot of scaling up, which was also very interesting. And like we've seen in other mostly business forums, a lot of times we come and we're talking about what we want to do. But what I heard a lot of the businesses saying on Monday especially, and even yesterday, those who were in the summit, was this is what we are doing, and this is what we're going to scale up. I think we know what Dangote is doing on the energy side, and he's thinking about scaling up. James Mwangi has been doing, and especially on this whole idea of the tea, and it's all about now we have the market. Now we are going to sell. These Moranga farmers are now going to sell. It's no longer an idea. We've perfected the idea. Now we have this specialty tea we have got in the market. So those are the kind of conversations that were there.
Ooh, walk me through, break that down, this 23 billion euros.
Worth of deal,
euros. Because even smallest ever is asking, USD or Kenya shillings?
USD is 27.
27. Yes. So walk me through a breakdown of the various sectors where these monies have been made, or potentially...
Potentially where the investments will be.
Yes.
A lot of it is in manufacturing. A lot of it is in there's energy are big deals because there's a big focus on green energy, renewable energy, and then there's agribusiness. We export a lot of our horticulture to Europe. Yeah. So there was a big conversation of the things that France needs from us. And also, and that. And then, of course, there was manufacturing, and a lot of co-investment around manufacturing. You've seen a lot of businesses, the French businesses, especially in retail sector, but now they're also in energy, but big manufacturing now is moving towards this side, and especially for East Africa, I think it's a very different moment, France has been moving in slowly. I was involved in a conversation many years ago, and I was trying to think, was it 2014, when the current President Macron was a minister then? And it was a conference in France, and the conversation then was France talking about increasing the investments in Africa and moving east. Okay. And today,
10 years ago, 12 actually.
About 12 years ago, wow. And then look, he's president today, and you can see what's happening. Our first international partner to knock on our doors was MEDEF. MEDEF is the counterpart of KEPSA in France. And they're the ones who looked out, in MEDEF International, they looked out for us. They came, we had a conversation. That time, the French companies were actually very few in the country. And that was about 15 years ago. There were not that many. And we're looking back and seeing French-related companies right now in the country, about 210. So there's been growth very systematically, but there's been a big push towards that. We only knew Total, a few companies here and there, but now, and cosmetic companies, L'Oreal and all that. But now we're seeing many more in the retail sector. We're seeing, Carrefour, even though the one that is here is a franchise from Dubai, but still the mother company is from France. So there's a lot of that has changed. And language is never a barrier when it comes to business. Business will go where the environment is conducive.
But I wanted to ask, because that Carrefour question has hit me before. How do you franchise a franchise? Because you're told Carrefour is a French company, but then up in Al Majid Fatim. Explain. How do you franchise a franchise?
You need the Kenyan Carrefour CEO to come. Christoph is my good friend.
Okay.
He'll explain details, but yes. So it's a franchise from Dubai.
Okay.
So there's a way they do it.
It's a franchise of a franchise.
Yeah, but I'm sure he can explain a lot more details.
Russian nesting dolls. Open,
there's another one inside.
Okay. Caroline, I'm very curious. So, beautiful summit, so many stakeholders, amazing people who have the power and will to actually then expedite all the commitments that have been made. How do we ensure these commitments don't end up in a filing cabinet somewhere? Who are the people that then now need to step in and make sure that these 23 billion euros worth of deals have actually gone through? And also the time factor, because you've sat on presidential roundtables before, you've been part of summits before. How much time do you usually take to see the execution part of these deals?
So a lot of them depends on the sector. A lot of them depends on the size. But what we're seeing, there's global transition that's happening. We're in a new world order, the new trade order. So there's a bit of urgency than we've seen before. And that's what I said when I sat in this business forum. It was very different. A lot of times people say, okay, we would like to do this. These are the opportunities. We talk about opportunities. We talk about the Africa that has opportunities. But what the conversation this time was very different. It was about the decade of Africa industrialization. It was the moment for Africa. So a very different kind of conversation. We talk about potential. We talk about production. And you can see what each person who stood on that platform on Monday from the business sector talked about what they're already doing in Africa, whether they're from France or they're from an African country, and what they talk about is scale up. So that tells you it's different, and we're not going to see things go and being covered and in the shelf and all that, because things are already happening. It's about scale up. And what people are saying, I'm already doing this, I'm going to be scaling up, or I'm looking for co-investors so that I can scale up. So that's a very different conversation than before.
Apart from government, and I'd want us to park government there, who are the other stakeholders we'd be looking at to make sure that this vehicle moves? Like we said yesterday, we had the
Chamber.
The chamber, yes, of commerce, Ruto and yourself, that's KEPSA. So these are bodies. Are we working together towards realizing this agenda, or is each body taking theirs and saying, okay, us guys are going to run, you guys are lagging behind, we'll fast track ours because maybe we have the resources, we can mobilize. Are we working together towards this goal?
The businesses are the same. So we are bodies that only help businesses in different areas.
Okay.
But so a business will come to us because they want to be able to have, maybe there's an issue with government, they need we need to lobby for a conducive environment in a certain area. Maybe it's a policy, maybe it's a regulation, or they'll be looking to co-invest with others, and they're thinking, okay, where are the partners that we can invest with, and all that. And those kind of platforms, they're looking at, maybe they're saying, okay, we want to move to green industrialization, and we do a lot of training, we do a lot of connection with partners and all that. But then they'll also go to chamber and say, you know what, I'm registered this way, but I would like to maybe register a new company in this area. Or I'm an SME, I would like to access this kind of a market. So businesses will come to us, and depending on the sizes of businesses, they come to us for different reasons. So everyone has a stake in making sure that business is happening. Business is growing, business is investing. We're looking for the investors. So the roles are there. We work together in different ways. When we meet investors, we have our own capabilities. Chamber has its own capabilities, and we support business.
I can see. I mean, it makes absolute sense and logic that the business person sitting across the table are striking a deal, and they want the best out of it. I want my business to thrive, to grow, to make more money, as I can get, shareholder return. What are usually the challenges that they face after they shake hands and they say, we do this, we do this. Sour. What challenges do they face thereafter when they walk out that door?
They do. I think some of the things that we discussed on Monday, we are very fragmented markets still in Africa. And so what we're talking about is that can we create regional value chains? Can we really strengthen our economic blocks so that we can strengthen our markets and stop being fragmented markets? We have very fragmented infrastructure. A lot of our infrastructure is changing now rapidly, was very outward facing, to our colonial masters. The one not integrating. The rail came was from Mombasa to Uganda, in Kenya's case, and to extract the raw materials from Uganda from Kenya and out. It was not to integrate Kenya, Uganda, all the way to DRC and to Nigeria and all that. And so what we're talking about now is integrating our infrastructure, integrating our logistics, so that when something like Hormuz happens and you run, we're not caught up. Integrating our energy. When you think about DRC, did you know DRC could power almost half of Africa with power? Yet we have dark villages today, just because we have not really harness that power, produce that power, and being able to have the logistics and the infrastructure to take it out to where it needs to be. So that's some of the conversations we're having and saying those are the challenges businesses have. I want to move my flowers from here to Burkina Faso. But where do I go? I take them first to Europe,
then bring them back,
and then bring back to Burkina Faso. There's still so many countries today where it's the ease. If today I want to go to Morocco, I still go to Dubai, I still go to France to be able to go to Morocco. It's easier than me flying to Egypt and trying to connect and all that, even cost-wise. And those are the challenges businesses faces. But there's also non-tariff barriers. If I find as Kenya, I'm not competing with Egypt, even though we're in COMESA. Instead of looking at the issues that maybe have made Egypt more competitive, like cost of power and all that, what do? I lobby my government to put non-tariff barriers against Egyptian products. You know, so those are some of the things that business faces. Some we create ourselves, some are just because of where we are, and those are the things we need to address.
Sorry, I'm giggling. It's just the example you gave. It's giving it like evil villain who's not very creative. So Egypt has cheaper potatoes. What do? Do I figure out why their potatoes are cheap and I try and make mine cheaper? Or do I find a way to make theirs more expensive?
Or can I do both? Can I first make theirs expensive as I figure myself out?
It's a very like the making theirs more expensive is very cartoonish.
It's counterproductive.
It's very evil villain in a cartoon.
And not only non-tariff barriers. And I mean, we're seeing with a new trade order, what are we seeing? Countries are looking inward. You know, what have we seen? The US saying the jobs have to come back. You're putting the tariffs. They're even putting tariffs and saying, you know, Kenya will put 10%, you know, China will put 60%. So you become uncompetitive and then you put the tariffs, you know. And so what we're seeing is also a pushback from globalization, you know, and people looking inward. And we're saying that will not help the world, you know, to just make, you know, everyone will just will not be able to compete that way. You know, and so there are some of the challenges businesses face. And we've seen some of the businesses move where there's high tariff to where there's lower tariff so that they can still access those markets. You know.
I mean, we'll be coming back to this conversation, just getting to understand again the insights that we've been getting from the economic survey and how those fed into this summit and what some of the things we can expect as we go on to this finance bill cycle and what the future looks like as far as the outcomes from this summit. This is Fixing the Nation, one conversation at a time. We'll be right back.
Still, Mike the One says, even when a deal looks attractive, risk assessment is still necessary. A good opportunity without examining the risk can become costly later. I think a question to you here, Carole. What's our exit plan? Just in case. Like, just in case. And the Kikombe asks, the G2G between Lufthansa and Le Kenya, are they agreements, grants, loans, guarantees, or some financing agreement? Merci.
Oh, and still on the cynicism kidogo, Charlie says, I'm a cynic 100%. They are not altruistic. What's in it for them? What for the French? What does investing in Africa do for them?
So I don't think there's anything without risk.
Correct.
I think what every investor looks at is their risk appetite. You know, what's my risk appetite? And then do due diligence as much as possible to reduce the risk. Then secondly, I don't have the details of the government ones, so I cannot comment on that. I'd rather stick to business. But at least I think we've seen some of them are security cooperation. And I think in the kind of world we live in, you have to look for partners to cooperate with in areas where you need partners. And I think that's what a partners was about. And one of the things that maybe I may mention that came out on Monday again about partners and what Kenyan, what was coming out from the African side is that we no longer having partners because partners are coming to us. We are choosing the partners and we are choosing how to relate with those partners. You know, how do we want to engage with them? Because no one is altruistic. Everyone has interests.
Correct.
You know, whether your countries, whether your businesses. And so you say, what are our interests? What are their interests? Where do we meet within those interests? And that's the difference between colonialization and doing business together. You know, and what we really emphasized on co-investment. We will invest, local investments was a push that if other investors will come into the country, if foreign investors are going to come and to go to Dangote, they will only come at the back of local investments. So we first push and go for our local investments, then the foreign investors will come. And then they'll come to our, in our terms, not their terms. Because then I'll say, I'm able to do this energy project here. I need to work with a development, financing, financial institution to be able to expand to this. And then you work with such an institution. You may be able to, it may be a different kind of a business, but that's the whole idea. So that first we think that we must do it ourselves as local investors, and then go out and say which kind of partners do we need. That's the mindset that was in that room. And that's a mindset I would hope that we as Kenyans and we as Africans may carry forward. And then we'll see development than seeing what we have seen in the past. Africa has been called all manner of names, from dark continent to the continent of the future,
to the third world.
Third world, to the Africa of potential. But we're saying no, we cannot remain potential. We have to be. It's about Africa of production. Industrialization of Africa, and that's a very different conversation.
Tell me about how the private sector keeps its antenna up, because the antenna has been up from a G2G perspective. A lot of people saying, you know what, France is here not just out of love for Kenya, but because essentially they're losing grip in West Africa and looking for new friends. Kenya happens to be one of them. So any deal that is made, including the security ones, let's have our eyes open, let's have our antenna up, let's interrogate. What's the private sector version of that?
It's the same. I think it's the same. You don't want to even do business with somebody who you don't understand what they are looking for and what they want, and being able to say, are you sitting on the table as equal partners in this business? So it's the same, and I think business has done that over and over. Maybe governments have been slower to adopt that because of they've focused a lot in the past on development aid, which has since kind of almost dried up, and so it's different. So even governments now looking at different models, co-investments, and so I think private sector has led with that, and I don't think anyone puts their money without having their eyes or their feet very aware of what's happening. So I think governments are catching up
to the private sector.
To the private sector.
Okay.
Are we seeing a lot more of Kenyan companies partnering with, like say French companies or West African companies or other companies across the globe, or is it a Kenyan broker who is bringing a French company into Kenya?
We're seeing more Kenyan companies, less than brokers. I think, and I think I gave you the experiences of people like Equity. Equity is not a broker. It's actually a company that's partnering with a French company on specialty teas. We're seeing many companies, we're seeing flower growers who are partnering with markets, with on the other side, who are companies on the other side. So that's what we see more than brokers. I think that field of brokers is less and less now because companies can do it themselves, and they're looking into business. So either you're looking at market, either you're looking at investment, whether here or in France. And one of the things we were talking about, I met with the president of the French Chamber of Commerce, France. Their local association here is a member of KEPSA. So their CEO from France was here, and we met yesterday, and part of that is the conversation we were having, because the chamber in France deals only primarily with SMEs, and they deal with SMEs development. And we were saying, we have over the years as KEPSA, we have worked with about 500,000 SMEs, whether it's in capacity training, market, financial access, and all that. But one of the things that we have struggled with for SMEs is market access, and especially international market access. And so we have a lot of SMEs that export ready, but we've not been able to access the markets. And that's one of the things we'll be working with the France Chamber of Commerce in France on that.
And what's that challenge with market access? I mean, we have an EU-Kenya economic partnership agreement that allows us quite a wide array of access into many markets in the European countries. So what is that challenge that Kenyan companies have been facing?
I think there are several. One is standards. The EU standards are very stringent, and meeting those standards has not been easy, especially for the smaller companies in Kenya. So the big companies have not had much of that challenge, but for the smaller companies, the standards have been a problem. The other one is logistics. You know, as I said, we're still having very fragmented infrastructure. And so being able to get some produce from, let me use Kinangop, because it has always been used for because of having very good produce but bad infrastructure. You know, and really getting it to the airport to Nairobi while it's still fresh and get it to the market. You know, so infrastructure, the fragmented infrastructure, undeveloped infrastructure in some places have been big issues. And just that whole issue of logistics. And logistics are also costly. You know, when you think about the shipping side of logistics and all that. So that has been costly. And then even financial access, you know, and that's why we really were excited to see some of the development finance institutions in the country on Monday, from IFC and others. I think you saw some of people who have been like McDowell, who's been in this country for a long time, and now I think he's the president or the vice president of IFC. Was in town, you know. So seeing some of that, you know, AFDB was in town and others. Those are the ones that are going to start helping and working together with this with the businesses to be able to have the finances they need, either to scale up or to be able to export.
We have to look at the reality of doing business in Kenya as it stands. The private sector has been very vocal about punitive taxes and a very non-conducive environment for even investors to come in. Then we have this summit that is speaking very positive language. But we are still the same country that with every cycle, especially when the finance bill comes in, the sentiment is the same. The stakeholders are all speaking the same language. And of course, that has had a very big effect on job creation. And some of the outcomes from this summit has been, okay, we're inking all of these deals. Where are the jobs? Is the private sector going to be able to open up more to create more formal jobs and to allow for Kenyans to actually directly benefit of this 23 billion euros. I want you to speak to that, and also maybe also let us know what some of the expectations you have with the upcoming finance bill. Because again, we've been talking about it and we'll keep talking about it for the next couple of weeks because it's already now on the floor of the House.
You see, when businesses talk about scaling up, they can't scale up without talent. And where will that talent come from? You know, Kenya and Africa has such good talent. And that was another conversation we had on Monday. And one of the things that we were talking about was we were telling the French investors, as you come to Africa, we want the industries to be powered by African talent because talent is there. You know, and then think about it. If a company is scaling, it still needs that manpower, and the manpower is available. It's educated, it's ready for the market. So that's not a problem. And so I think the push is to say, what are the things that will make these companies move faster and scale up? What will make these investors come sooner? You know, what enabling environment do we need? And so that's what we're going to be engaging with government. And we already have a scheduled roundtable with the president coming up soon, actually around the tax bill, the finance bill. And so we'll be talking around about that. And I think it is very good we're going to be having this meeting immediately after this summit, because then we can say all this was agreed. Investors are ready to scale up. Investors are ready to come. And when I talk about investors, I'm not talking about only French investors and European investors. I'm talking about other African investors, you know, who are ready to come into Kenya and or expand in Kenya. And so what is that competitive environment that we need to give them? When we look at the tax regime, and sometimes it's just not taxes. You know, there's a lot of other regulations, whether it's NEMA, whether it's KEPSA and everyone else, who we need to, or you know, that need to look at this as business. You know, whatever they do, is it facilitating business? It's not choking business. It's about facilitating business. And so that's a conversation we're going to be having. And I think the summit provides that. So as we look at the finance bill, it covers a lot of many regulators and all that, and saying these are some of the good things that this finance bill is going to do for a lot of these investments, but these are some of the areas and what can we do differently, you know, to really increase business and to make us competitive.
I want to speak to young entrepreneurs and young enterprises and MSMEs. conferences like this feel like a big boy game.
Yeah.
You know, people worth their billions and their millions and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
What room was there for MSMEs, young enterprises, young entrepreneurs to come and benefit from this just as much as a Total, a L'Oreal, a Safaricom, a KEPSA.
Yeah. It's, one of the things that we push from a KEPSA perspective is the value chains. And we look at if you're the big company at the end of the chain, where do you source all your materials from? And you're able to source from all these, you're talking about the SMEs, and the MSMEs and the youth and all that. So creating the value chains where everyone fits into that value chain. And so there's a place for everyone. And I think for me, if you are an SME in that room, I think the idea was to listen and say, what are these? Who are these? And where are they investing?
Right.
And who are these and what are they scaling? And which areas are they scaling in? And so where do I come in? You know, and then be able to meet them and have that conversation. You don't have to be on your own. Just as these companies are looking for co-investors of the same size, you as an SME, you co-invest with them by getting to their value chain.
I hear that. But I'm wondering, is there a minimum threshold for joining KEPSA? Like a turnover, yes? A minimum turnover yearly, something?
No. We have different categories. We have a categories for SMEs for as less as 10,000 a year.
Yes.
Because those are so we have two tiers for SMEs, those who pay 10,000 and those who paid 50,000. Then we graduate you as you grow.
So then what is KEPSA doing to handhold an SME, you know, and make sure that they get the best value, because they might not have the resource. If a big corporate is coming to Africa Forward Summit, they have already done the lobbying beforehand. They have been in conversations. They have made the networks over the years. They know CEO Wahuku or Niulena, Felaris Niwapale, and so on and so forth. They're coming in with a massive advantage. But as a private sector alliance, how do you? What's the value add for an SME and an MSME to make sure that they don't go and they are deer in headlights, or they're overwhelmed, or they're not being listened to? You get my
So we run several programs. Like the current one we call Jinwe, you know, uplift yourself. But what this program does, it has several components. First is to capacity build you as an SME in the areas that you need capacity building. Secondly, is financial. So we partner with MasterCard Foundation and are able to give loans from about 15,000 to 15 million, depending on the size. And the whole idea is that you're not paying back with interest because you're an SME and we want to uplift you. Secondly, is the networking. The reason why they are part of KEPSA is because when this is coming up, they're able to say, I'm an SME, I do this, I can see these companies that are coming in. These are some of the people who'd like to talk to. There was already an app for this summit before it happened. So people are able to have conversations, you know, and then after that, you can come back to say, I made this contact and everything, but I need to be able to follow up. That's our work to help you follow up. So the networking is very important. The mentorship is very important. We even have one of our areas of mentorship, we call it a meetup with a CEO. So you meet up with a CEO who you see what the journey they walked, because everyone started as an SME. You know, I always say the micro enterprise of today is your Microsoft of tomorrow. You know, they start in the garage. You know, so no one started at the top. And so having those meetups with the CEOs and hearing those conversations and being mentored by those CEOs, that's part of what we do for these SMEs.
I just thought of something as Caroline was speaking. A way of, outside of mentoring, say, the founders of these businesses, is there a structure in which smaller businesses can be incubated within the larger businesses where they can benefit from the structures that have been applied, so they reduce like their cost of setup and putting up systems, and that in a way helps them. It's just a business incubator. Is there such a thing that's either maybe currently happening? I know the Kenya Innovation Agency has been thinking around something like that. Is that something that would then probably help these businesses also grow to that level and scale?
I think it's happening, but it's not as coordinated. It's in small areas where maybe you find a company that works maybe with farmers as outgrowers. They incubate them, they help them, they give them fertilizers, they train, they do, and all that. So there's that. So maybe scaling that up for more SMEs, and especially those now that are not farmers who are maybe other smaller businesses, to be able to be incubated within the premises of the big companies. So because we do that from an association perspective. We incubate, we look at an area like now. Our latest one is the AI National Association of Kenya. We look at a sector where that is coming up, and then we look at the players and we bring them together and we help them form an association. And we incubate them. Some of them, we even give them an office in KEPSA to be able to grow until they are able to get to their feet and get out and find their own premises and move. So we've done that with BMOs. So I think what we need to encourage the private sector is to do a lot more now with the SMEs.
With the SMEs.
Should this not be a government-led thing? Because it's in the interest of government that small enterprises are incubated and they grow. Started with cottage industries. The whole reason why we had Kenya Industrial Estates and such, Oko in the 60s, at the beginning of our independence, was because the government realized we need to grow our own. So Kenya Industrial Estates and others were established across the country with go-downs, with machining facilities, where you're a small enterprise going the Kariobangi Light Industries was established by government so that small enterprises can go there, come in here, there's supply of power, there's space, there's cheaper, easier. It was an incubation.
They do. The government does. The same SME authority.
Minus the negative things that come out of there. There's a lot of positives.
You're going to judge me so much.
But there's a real Kariobangi Light Industries.
I didn't know.
Yes, can you imagine?
I genuinely thought it was just the counterfeits, and then that was the name.
So it was a moniker given to them.
Yes, like a moniker for bad things. It's actually a positive thing. So back to the question, Carole, should this not be government-led, especially now with county governments? County governments establish those spaces, incubation centers for small businesses, micro businesses, cottage industries come up. We offer you a lot of facilitation support, and then you can start growing, because giving the job to the private sector.
Everything to private sector.
Private sector, mimi kazi yangu ni to make money. You're telling me to start holding a neighbor's baby.
No.
I am not a...
They do. Private sector does. And a government, let me give credit to where it's due. Government does it. We have the SME authority. And this came about because in 2010, as we started engaging with the SMEs in the country, we realized it was so fragmented. And I remember we traveled around the country and we did not meet 1,200 SMEs. It was 1,200 associations of SMEs. Every little subsector had an association. So what we did was to try and bring them together into a federation. But now there are bigger. That didn't work too well, but there are many bigger ones. But what we also pushed, SME as it is, and essentially that time it was called MSME or MSC. The name keeps changing, but let's just call it SME. Was never in one ministry. It would move from trade, it would move to labor, it would move to different cooperatives, and that was part of the reason why there was that fragmentation in the sector. And so we actually sponsored a bill as KEPSA, MSC bill of 2010, that created the SME authority and actually moved SME to trade. Now it's a ministry on its own. So there's a lot more happening than we had seen in many years. So the 60s and 70s we seem to have done well with the KIEs and all that, but something changed along the way. And as many institutions collapsed in the 80s and the 90s, we saw a bit of those changes. But something is coming together now. And now that there's a policy, there's a bill, there's an act of parliament. So we have an SME Act of 2010 or 2012, because I think we started the work in 2010. And that's what we use, even from the private at KEPSA side, to say what are those challenges of SMEs, from capacity building, market access, and that's what we keep implementing with partners as government is trying to do its work.
Government is this, it's a sloth. What's that thing, that animal?
A sloth.
Don't do
Let me tell you why I say that, Carole. Okay, so we have a law, We have a standalone ministry. We have all those things. We have ideas. Kenya Kwanza is implementing the plan. Bottom-up economic transformation agenda. One of the things that we're talking about is introduction of KEPSA. We saw the other day the minister saying, Enye ukweli, this KEPSA thing is not supported by very many structural things that ought to have happened. And so we are seeing KEPSA have started, they have not moved. KEPSA idea was good, because that's why we are talking about the incubation hubs. So you come in, what's your expertise? This, you don't have to invest in machinery. You'll come and find the machinery. We'll do the parking for you. You just get the business, do your business. How slow has that been? That's why I'm calling government is a sloth.
Government is a big machine, moves slower than private enterprises, but it moves when it moves.
Even the largest whale on earth moves faster than the government of Kenya.
I think we've seen more successes in many areas, and I think with SMEs. I think we're starting to see change a lot more in government than ever before. So. Let's look at this in 5 years and see.
Let me, sorry, Fela. I just wanted to have her finish on what KEPSA is doing to lobby about the cost of compliance in this country. It's incredibly high. Especially for an MSME, it might get easier as you go along, but you can see the number of people who cite cost of compliance as a reason why they're leaving or why they closed business. It's just massive.
And a lot of it is not the cost. I think it's the way we do it. You know, and we've raised for many years when we have met with government, past presidents, we've always talked about business harassment, whether it's by KRA or by KEBS or by NEMA or by whoever else, and that's not been easy. And I think that's something we need to keep working at and not getting tired of just getting these institutions to understand they are facilitators of business. And so even when you talk to the SMEs, we've pushed a lot on the one-stop shop. You know, there's a time we used to have the single business permit.
Yes, for Nairobi.
For Nairobi. We've seen a lot more. There's a time we did guillotine of licenses. Remember during President Kibaki's time, 2006. Now we have a lot more licenses that have all come back, and we've been talking about that process again. Can we go back to guillotine? Because we're not saying we're not willing to pay. Tell me it's 1,000 shillings, but don't ask me to have a license for 100 shilling, and next license for another 100 shilling. Because that process of getting
licenses.
all that, there are businesses today who say they're. I mean, I think the tourism industry has about 42 licenses. People like KEBL, I think we're talking about another almost 50 licenses. I mean, it doesn't, if we could simplify the licensing regime, it would make it much easier, not only for the small business, even for the big businesses. They feel it and it's hard, and so I think it's something that we'll continue to advocate for, just simplifying the licensing regime.
What do they say when because you said, we know, obviously you have been doing it, and not just you, I'm sure even the Chamber of Commerce, the Association of Manufacturers. I know everyone is saying this. So what do they say when you tell them your cost of compliance and your burden of compliance is incredibly high?
The burden of compliance. We talk, we agree, but let me also tell you another challenge we've seen, at least from where I sit, is that when there's a problem, we tend to create a new organization, and that's how we ended up with the number of parastatals that we have in the country. And I'm so glad, having been involved in that whole parastatal reform process, that now we are starting to talk, to have not just the conversation, but starting to do the work of reducing those parastatals. Because today we go and say there's a problem here. What do? We create a parastatal. That parastatal has to be funded. The exchequer can't fund all of them. So where do they come back to? Back to the private sector. So I've been also questioning my own private sector. When we have a problem, let's go and say how we fix that problem. Let's not ask for an institution, because that will come and bite us back.
Fair. Kenya Institute of Management of Journalists.
And multiple other bodies. Well, that's been Carole Kariuki, CEO of the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, and tracking the deals. We'll keep tracking them one after another. I've seen a fixer asking what were some of the investments done on the creative sector. That's David Moridi. Maybe we should have Fikirini back as a PS. Just to discuss that. But in the next hour, we look back, lest we forget, with Boniface Mwangi. This is Fixing the Nation, one conversation at a time.